Okay, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone where you are located. Welcome everybody to our today's webinar, Apama EagleEye for Capital Markets. This is a live webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Markus Jocic and I'm your moderator, and I will guide you through this webinar. So first things first, during this webinar all lines are on mute to make it easier for the presenters to speak and so that you can listen to the presentation without any background noise. I hope you can all hear me well. If there are any technical issues, just give me a note in the chat window and I will try to help. Besides that, we will also record this webinar, and in case of any issues, or if you want to hear the session later again, you will find the recorded session within the next 2 days at our Software AG YouTube channel. To make this session also a little bit more interactive and to give you the chance to raise questions, you can submit any questions that you may have during the session through the chat window, and we will collect all the questions and answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So now let me introduce you to our speakers today. Our first speaker today is Patrick. Patrick is the Apama EagleEye product manager at Software AG, and he has already more than 15 years of experience around capital markets. And our second speaker is Prashant Patni. Prashant is the director of the delivery team at Software AG, responsible for surveillance solutions and big data practice at our consulting services unit. He led already a large number of Apama surveillance implementations during the last couple of years and is our first speaker now. So let's go ahead and begin, and I'm handing over to Prash now.
Thank you, Marcus. And thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day today to let us demonstrate our latest incarnation of trade surveillance to you guys, which is Apama EagleEye. Apama EagleEye is a holistic surveillance solution. It's actually the next incarnation of our historic market surveillance and monitoring solution. The key difference between the two is that Apama EagleEye is now a fully supported product available from Software AG. As well as being able to consume structured data, we can now consume unstructured data. So we have not only trades, orders, news, market data, but we can also now consume and integrate with communication data, behavioral data, and apply advanced analytics to help you with your holistic monitoring of your organization. We have a rich catalog of scenarios still available. Everything that was available in market surveillance is available in Apama EagleEye and more. And we also have additional modules around machine learning which are available, and these are currently being developed and worked on as we speak. With these machine learning components, we also have a strong team of data scientists available to help work with you to understand what features are important in your data and tailor custom-made scenarios and predictive analytics around your monitoring activities. Apama EagleEye is a highly configurable solution. You can tailor this to fit the needs of whatever kind of user is using it. So you have views available for high-level managerial positions and head of department positions and head of compliance, also tailored down to the level of a compliance officer working on different asset classes or different geographies. It's highly configurable to that nature, and the solution is fully customizable as well. We have enhanced user management in EagleEye as well, and quite significantly, we've put a lot of investment into developing the front end, the user interface, which we will now demonstrate to you and show you some of the features that we've got available in this new solution. The new UI is highly configurable as well. It's all built in new technologies, no reliance on any existing technologies from the old solution. So with that, I'll pass it on to Patrick McDonough, who'll take it away and take us through a demonstration of the solution.
Patrick, we can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute.
Me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Yes, we can. Thanks,
Okay,
Patrick.
perfect. So I'll just do it with the phone by my ear. So what I was saying is I've logged into the solution, and what I can see in front of me is a full list of the alerts that have been raised by the scenarios running within the system. Scenarios can run on real-time data, they can run on historical data. We operate on data in motion and at rest, whether that's streaming into the system or is arriving in batches from multiple different data sources. So immediately my user sees a full list of all the alerts that have been raised. So what I thought I'd do is just take you through part of the alert and case workflow within the system, and then we can raise some alerts in real time and do some data replay. But in order to start that off, what we'll do is look at an alert. So I'm a user and I can see down here the different alerts that have been raised in the system. And what I'm going to open for the purposes of this demonstration is an off-market rate alert, which is a rather simple alert. What it's saying is that a client has been traded with at an unfavorable rate to the client that is far off the current market rate. So I double click on the alert and that opens up all the alert details. So there's a description of the alert, some parameters associated to the alert, what those parameters were at the time the alert was raised, and I can see the market replay screen, which shows me the bid and offer lines within the market, as well as the trades that were received. So here I can see that we've received a couple of trades within the bid offer spread. But over here, I can see a trade far off the market with an alert telling me that this trade has been done at an unfavorable rate for the client. I can toggle some of the data to say, only show me the data associated to an alert. So now all I see is the alert with that trade, and I can untoggle that data. So I can manipulate what I see on the screen. Of course, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can change time ranges, etc. If I scroll down a little bit, I can see the order book replay, so I can see what was happening to the order book at this particular time, which depending on whether you're a broker sending bids and offers to the market, an exchange, or a bank, you may see slightly different data because the data that you operate with, it could in theory be different. But what you can see is the orders sent to the market, the trades that occurred, and alerts raised. So in this case, I can see I get the first trade, I get the second trade, and we raise an alert. So I know what data that alert was raised on and based on the market when the alert was created. So having a look at this, it does look to me slightly suspicious that there's a trade so far off market and other trades. There's clearly nothing wrong with the market price feed at the time. So what I'm going to do is add this alert to a new case, and I'm going to call it FX off market pricing. And I'm going to say it's a new case. I'm going to assign it to a user, and I'm going to say needs further investigation. I could have also selected from a pre-populated list of templates, which are of course completely configurable, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create my case. So what we just went through, a very quick recap, was the alert inbox, and we added an alert to a case. So if I look at my off-market rate alert here, I can now see it has a case ID associated with it. And if I go to cases and I have a look at the default case filter, I can see my new case, which view status is new, as I added it to be that way, and I can see the title of my case and what alert IDs are associated with this case. And as you can see, a case can have multiple alerts associated to it, so it's a many relationship alerts and cases. So I'm going to double click on the case, and what you can see very quickly in cases is there's comments, there's attachments, and there's a full audit history of everything that's happened within a case, who did it, when they did it, etc., etc. As well as that, below here, I can see the alerts. So all the alerts that have been added to this case, I created the case with one alert, so we just see the one. But let's add some comments, right? So let's just pretend I've gone downstairs and spoken to the trader who gave that client the rates on that trade, and I say need to investigate more alerts from FX traders because I just wasn't happy with the answer he gave, let's say. So I've added my comment. I can see that comment here. I can also add attachments. So let's pretend for a second that we've done further analysis, and I decide I'm going to add a document that has some of my analysis in it. What I'm going to add in here is actually just the EagleEye product roadmap. But I'm going to add that in there, and again, I'm going to put a comment next to this attachment saying evidence attached, and I'm going to add that attachment. So now if we have a look at the audit trail, what we can see was the case was created, a comment was added to it when I created the case from the alert inbox, the alert was raised, then I added a further comment and I've attached the document. As for the alert, I can open that alert in line within a case to have a look at it and have a look at the alert data. I can also add further alerts to the case. So let's just pretend for a minute that this alert over here, I decide this alert should be added to the case as well. And let's say I found another example of poor clients pricing over the phone. So all these deals were done over the phone and the rate fixed with the client, and I add that alert to the case. So we've done our analysis, we can see our alerts, we can of course again remove alerts from cases. So here's my two alerts now. Let's say I decide to change the status of the case. So I say actually this is now under investigation, and I want to put a comment here saying something like manager to check the investigation and see if it needs to be reported. And I change the status of the case and I add the comment, and I decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign this case to a different user. So now if I go back again to my default case filter, what we can see is it's been assigned to a different user, it's under investigation, and we can see our case now has two alerts within it. So we could decide to take this further and report it as abuse and archive the case, and there's many other operations we could perform. But just as a brief overview there, we had a look at the alert inbox, so alerts that are raised and details associated with the alert and what was happening at the market at the time, what orders were received, what trades were received in order to generate that alert, and have a look at the associated data with a particular alert. And then we went through, added some alerts to a case and went through a typical case workflow, adding some attachments, etc. So when Nigel decides to have a look at this, he may decide to have a look at the case. Of course, he can just look at the comments and he can open any attachments within the case. So all I've done here is I just double-clicked. I didn't have to save anything to my desktop or anything. I just double-clicked and it performs the default browser operation. You can then open those attachments, look through what's in there, review the case, review the alerts, and all the comments. So if we have a look at some other functionality, let's look at how alerts actually get into the system in the first place, right? Because we need some scenarios. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm just going to very briefly explain a simple scenario. So I've put a very simple scenario into the solution, and I'm calling it restricted list. And what that means is that if any ISINs or ISINs associated with an issuer that have been put onto a list to say no one should ever trade any of these instruments or any instruments that are issued by a particular legal entity, we should raise an alert. So it's quite a simple scenario. It just says, look, if this item is traded, you must raise an alert because no one in the organization should be trading any of these instruments or any of these instruments from this particular issuer. So, of course, we should get our alert. So the first thing there is to have a restricted list within the system. So we can have wall cross lists, restricted lists, watch lists, etc. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to add a restricted list. And what I'm going to put in here is I'm going to upload a restricted list to the system. Of course, this is normally done programmatically through integration, but you can create lists yourself and add them manually. So I've just added a restricted list to the system, and there are some items on this list that are now restricted. Further to this, I'm going to go to scenario management, and as you can see, there is a list of scenarios that are currently within the system. All of them are stopped and turned off. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the scenarios we have. We have a full scenario catalog in which there are far more scenarios than what there are on the screen. But as you can see, one of these is restricted list, and I'm just going to start the scenario. So the scenario is now started, and it gives me the timestamp that this was started within the system. Of course, that's right now. So we've uploaded a restricted list, and the restricted list scenario is live. Of course, scenarios can have multiple parameters. You can create new scenario instances, so you can have two scenarios running live within the system, operating on the same data, but with different parameters. You can change those parameters when you do replay, which I'll speak to you a little bit about later. But just to give you some flavor, I'm going to open the trade volume spike scenario, and as you can see, there's a list of parameters associated with that scenario. With my simple restricted list scenario, there's only one, and that's the severity of the alert, but it's just a simple scenario for the purposes of this demonstration. So restricted list is turned on, and we have a list. So what I'm going to do is look at my alert inbox and show you some other functionality while doing so. So underneath trade surveillance in our alert inboxes, we have a number of entries. What I'm going to do is clone one of these, just to show you this functionality, and call it restricted list, because maybe I am a user who is heavily interested in restricted list alerts and responsible for them. So maybe I want to create my own tab that already has filters set up to show me the data I'm interested in. So I've created my own restricted list entry under trade surveillance. I cloned it from another entry, so I'm just going to reset the severity here. And I'm going to say, actually, if a scenario contains the word restricted, then I want to see that alert. At the moment, there's no restricted list items, but what I'm going to do is send some data into the system in real time, and what we should see happen is that some restricted list alerts are raised. And as you can see, we're starting to see some restricted list alerts. So what I've done behind the scenes is I've just started a test system that starts pushing data through the system, and we're analyzing this data in real time. So the restricted list scenario is a scenario that's operating on data in motion in real time. And as you can see, we've now generated a list of alerts for restricted list. So again, we could go through the normal workflow. We could add them to cases. We may decide actually these alerts, we just want to close them because they're false positives or whatever the case may be. To show you some other functionality, I thought I would show you data replay. So these restricted list alerts are now live within the system. So we started the restricted list scenario, live data was sent through. We haven't replayed any data or done anything. It is live data that it was operating on in real time, and they are now stored within the system, and users can operate on them. But let's say there's a hypothetical scenario that the restricted list we were running with wasn't quite correct. So what I can do is go back to the restricted list, and I can decide to change the file. Maybe what I want to do is add a few extra items. So I upload a new restricted list for the same date, and I decide to override the existing list. And I now have 23 items on the list rather than 18. So we've added some items that were missing, but our data's already been analyzed, right? So what do? Well, we can easily, as a user, decide to do a data replay. So I've changed the restricted list to add some new items on it that were missing, and I say, look, you know, actually, we noticed this issue a few months ago now for the 15th of December. So what I'd like to do is replay all data against the restricted list scenario, because we've added some new items to the restricted list, and I would like to see what alerts are raised. So let's call this replay 1, and I can add some notes to this replay. And I can start my data replay. And as you can see, the start, so we've slowed it down for the purposes of the demo, but it's now generated 23 alerts. So I can select this replay, and I can say compare it with what's live, what's currently in the system. So I've done a data replay. I replayed the same data. We just are running the same restricted list scenario, but with a different list. And what it's telling me is that in replay 1, I have these 5 alerts that are new, that are not existing in the system. What I can do is I can select these alerts individually and have them persisted into the system as now new live alerts that need managing. I can accept all of the alerts that are only in replay 1 and not live in the system. And I could even accept all of these alerts as even the duplicates that are in the live system. It's just up to me as a user. The other thing I could do is I can actually run another replay as well. So let's go to our restricted list, and let's change the list again. And now I'm going to put very few items onto the restricted list. So I change it in a live running environment. I can go back and I can do another data replay for the same date on the same data, and I can have a look at what this does. So let's call this replay 2. And I select my restricted list scenario. I'm not going to add any comments in this one, and I'm just going to run the replay. And let's see what happens. So again, it's analyzed the same data, but this time it's only generated 7 alerts because there were far fewer items on the restricted list. What I can do, again, I could compare that replay to live, or I can compare replays to one another. Right? So in this case, I'm saying, oh, this is interesting. I'm having a look here at replay 1 and replay 2. I can see all these alerts that say yes in them are live within the system, and all of the ones that have got like a slight pinky background to them do not exist on the replay on the right. So it's a way of running replays. You can run these against multiple scenarios. You can change the parameters of the scenarios, and you can run what-if scenarios to see what alerts you would generate with changes you've made in the system, changes you've made to scenarios, a new scenario that you would like to backtest, etc. So, quick recap, we have the alert inbox showing us all the alerts that have been raised. We have the case workflow where you can manage alerts and investigate alerts and pass them between users and share information. And data replay, where you can in effect make changes to the system and replay data for any date across any given scenarios, and you can change scenario parameters, etc. as well. So, as Prashant was saying, we've been spending quite a bit of time and effort into having a look at different kinds of data within the organization. So I think what we've spoken about now is really normal trade surveillance. Things that we started looking at is what do we do with unstructured data as well as structured data? How do we analyze that data? How can we store it? How can it be easily retrieved for users moving forward to further investigate cases? So we're starting to look at behavioral data and communications data and grouping people together and trying to find if there is a peer group and there are people that are behaving in a different manner to their peers, etc. So in order to show you some of this, I thought what I would show you is the comm screen. So we have the capability of integrating with communications providers, and we can pull in communications data and store that and make it much easier for surveillance users to retrieve that information at their fingertips. So if someone is analyzing, let's say, a rate fixing alert, they would be able to filter and search communication data between traders and have a look at who was saying what and when. So what I've brought up here is a screen where we can, it's quite a granular view of communications data. We see individual communications that have been stored. Of course, you can view the details of communications. So in here, it's telling me it's an email, and this was the text within the email. We have screens where we're showing the graph, the network graph, the communication graph between people. So what this is showing is from Sunita, who she communicates with. So you can see she's communicating with myself, Patrick McDonough. There's quite a lot of communication there, hence the line between Patrick and Sunita is quite orange, i.e. the bulk of their communication is between one another. And then she communicates with other people within the organization, but the very light blue, for instance, is not a lot of her communication, right? It's not the bulk of her communication, but these are people she's communicating with, etc. Likewise, here to the right, what we've done is we've grouped people by where they work, who are their peers. So everybody here is sitting on the FX desk. People here are on the bond desk, so bond traders. We have an external person to the organization, another external person to the organization, but we know who they work for. And then we have the mergers team internally within the organization. So this starts to give us a feeling for, you know, who's communicating with who and when and how. So again, I can start filtering this. So let's just say I'm interested in seeing all of Patrick's communication, so all of my own communication in this case. So now the data's been filtered, and as you can see, I'm nicely sitting here in the middle, and it's showing me everybody that I communicate with. So the view is completely changed based on the filtered data, and we're starting to drill into this a little bit more. So again, we've started to explore this kind of unstructured data and trying to find ways of making sense of the data. And I guess the way we view communications, it's quite a large topic, but the way we view it is what's important is who is communicating with who, how are they communicating with these people, and what has been said is maybe slightly less irrelevant, right? It's more who is communicating with who, how, and when. And from speaking to the surveillance users of the system, we believe that actually putting this information at their fingertips and making it easy for them to view communications data and how the network graph of communications is working will bring the most value. So again, we can start looking through this communications data and have a look at what's happening. And as you can see here, there's a bit of a flurry of activity around Friday. So I can do, you know, more advanced searches and search and filter based on multiple time ranges and date ranges, etc. But for the purposes of this demo, I've just knocked up some data, and what I can see here is Sunita and Patrick. There is something a little bit suspicious going on because at around auction periods within the market, Sunita from mergers is often talking to Patrick, who's myself, a trader. And what that shows me is that, you know, there's some evidence here, you know, irrespective of what the communication is and what's being said, that's highly suspicious and really should be investigated further. Again, in the solution, there's some other key areas. I suppose the one thing I would say is that we also have whitelist functionality. So we spoke a little bit earlier about the restricted list. We also have wall cross lists where organizations can in effect declare mergers, etc., and notify which traders are aware of what deals and mergers and what trading restrictions have therefore been placed onto them. We also have the whitelist, and whitelists are where within a scenario, you can ignore data and say, actually, if I'm seeing data with these parameters, i.e. from this trader within a particular scenario, just ignore the data and don't raise an alert, etc. As well as this, we have all of our user administration and group administration, so the ability to create new users, inactivate those users, delete the users, assign users to groups. Groups can then have permissions. So here I'm having a look at who can see what screen. So I'm going to click on my test group, and whether or not I'm allowed to see the alert inbox. If I can see it, what operations I can perform. So let's open data replay because we spent a bit of time on that screen. So what we're saying here is this group can see the data replay screen, and then we have individual permissions for whether they're able to run replays, save replays, view replays created by other users, persist alerts within the database, etc., and actually accept those replays. So if I jump back to that, I can take a replay. Let's compare it with live. And I have the permission to accept the alerts that are in this replay. So I'm going to go ahead and accept them and jump back to my restricted list filtered alert inbox. Save the filter. And what I'm able to now see is all the new alerts that were persisted from running a replay. So here they are, and they're from replay 1 rather than the default alerts that were created as the system was running live over the data. And I can now perform operations on these alerts as I could have any other alert. So moving forward, what we are planning on doing, so I'm going to flick back to the PowerPoint presentation. So currently in our roadmap, what we're planning on developing is user-generated scenarios. So we started work on this, and we want to give users more control around the scenarios that can be created. So the solution is completely open. You can add your own scenarios, you can add your own logic. Currently that's being done with code, and we're looking at giving users more control so that they can create some basic scenarios with some plug-and-play features. We've also been adding reporting, like an analytics toolkit for a while, using the Software AG Mass Zone, and we're looking at enhancing that and generating new reports, which will put more power, again, within the user's hands, because they can generate their own reports and analytics on data that's stored within the database. So let's say, for example, the head of compliance says, hey guys, I would like a report that I can look at that tells me what the status of all the individual cases are and how many cases are currently open and what's happening with alerts. Users will actually be able to go in and create that. Advanced market replay, I've just shown you some of that. That's the comparison between replays, and again, we're going to keep adding new functionality. Our communication scenarios, so Prashant was talking a little bit earlier, so we're looking at using outlier classification for the peer analysis and how we analyze communications data to find outliers and give surveillance users hints to where discrepancies are, and how we can look at people's data. We're also taking that a step further to start looking at rogue trading. So is someone going away, and when they go and visit a particular client, their expenses are much higher than what they normally are and completely out of line with all of their peers? So it's an area that we believe is going to bring a lot of benefit within the surveillance space, to start looking at all the different kinds of data within an organization. So expense reports, when people turn up for work, when they leave. For instance, it would be highly suspicious if on a Monday morning at 6 a.m. a trader is turning up. Again, none of his peers are doing that, and occasionally he turns up on a Saturday. We would view that as slightly suspicious, and maybe someone wants to ask him why and have a look at what that trader is actually doing at that time of the day. Data segregation and further permissions. So what we're starting to see more often than not is that just that data is flowing into the system, but people would like slivers of that data analyzed in isolation or grouped together. So we're going to give users more control so that they can slice and dice data for analysis. So we already have the notion of being able to add permissions on your data. So you could, for instance, add a geographic permission and then analyze one geography's data in isolation from another. So you could say analyze US data for wash trading and UK data for wash trading in isolation. But we want to give users more control into how they can slice and dice that data and add further granularity for data analysis. And I think some of the some of the more interesting things that we're starting to do is widgets that we're adding to the UI to create better analysis of communications data and behavioral data. So we're very interested in speaking to prospects and existing clients and continuing to have conversations of where they feel surveillance is lacking, what users need, what they would really like, what they've found, so that we can keep building new functionality into the UIs in order to speed up the workflow that surveillance users go through in order to analyze alerts, find suspicious data within an organization. So if anybody would like to speak to us more about that, there are of course people who you can contact. So there is myself, Patrick McDonough. So I've been working here as a consultant and currently managing the EagleEye roadmap and looking at what features we would like to add to the product and what customers want. So I'm always interested in speaking to people. Prashant, who was talking earlier, manages GCS delivery. So for customers who would like to upgrade from MSM to EagleEye, Prashant is probably the key guy to speak to, as well as Echo Arthur, also leading delivery, and Tracy Lindsay sponsoring the solution. So as far as giving a demo and walking through the solution, I think I've given a high-level overview. If anybody would like a deeper dive into the solution and we can explain how things work and time to market, etc., I'm always more than happy to speak to you. But I thought what I would do is leave the remaining time for questions. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or if anyone would like me to do a deeper dive on any of the functionality that I've been showing you today.
So we have right now no questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat window or the Q&A panel. There's one question from Lee Gray. Can you see that, Patrick?
The question is, what is the relationship of EagleEye to the standard Apama product?
Good question. So EagleEye is built using Apama universal messaging. There are components of Cementis as well as MashZone for the reporting and user-generated analytics side. So the solution runs on top of all of those software AG products. So it runs on top of Apama. So EagleEye itself is built using a combination of technologies, so Java, Apama EPL code, as well as some integration in effect. But EagleEye is a platform that runs on top of those software AG products. It is a product that lives on the price list in its own right, so it is a fully supported solution. It has its own development team working on it, where we are creating new features, any kind of bug fixing. It's fully supported, and in effect sits on top of Apama.
All right, then another question. Can you change scenario parameters for replay?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. So in fact, if I'm understanding it correctly, so what you can do is in scenario management, as well as turning scenarios on and off live within an environment. So let me open the volume spike for this. What you're able to do, so I'm going to zoom in here a little bit just so that I know you guys can see it. So I've opened up trade volume spike, and here is a list of parameters with this scenario. Now, what you're able to do is you can say, you can go in here, so scenario replay instance property. So what I can do is I can change the parameters so that I'm actually editing them when I do a replay. As well as that, what you're able to do is create multiple instances of a scenario. So where that comes in a useful fashion is let's go back to the example where, say, we wanted to analyze US data and UK data in isolation in a scenario. So analyzing data grouped by region. What you're able to do is say, okay, my trade volume spike data scenario, this instance, let's call it instance 0, I want operating on US data, and these are the parameters that I want to run against the US data. Whereas scenario instance number 1, I want operating on UK data, and these are the parameters that I want to set against that data. We also have the notion of scenario variance, just to take it a little bit further, which is where you can have the same scenario running, but the logic that it runs is different depending on the asset class. So wash trading for FX, you may want to run very different logic, or you really would want to run very different logic against your FX data as you would your bond data. So we have the notion of scenarios. There can then be variance, so the business logic is slightly different given the asset class. You can then have multiple instances of those scenarios, and those instances can have different properties. And again, you can have multiple instances for scenario replay, so the replay of data through a live system. So I hope that answers the question. I know I explained a little bit more than what was asked, but you know, like I said, it's just a quick overview of the solution. But in terms of parameters, scenario instances, and variance, that's those are in effect all the combinations that you can have within the system.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So for those who are still in the call, if you have any questions, please use the chat window. So we have one more. What's your view on communication surveillance?
Okay, so yeah, actually this is a question that we often get asked. So let me expand a little bit on what I was speaking about earlier, and let me bring up the communication screen. And again, I'm gonna just slightly zoom in. So we've been having a lot of talk. So what do you do? Generally in the market, there's two areas around communication surveillance, or at least two schools of thought. So the first one to me is you're actually looking at text data, and you're analyzing that text data, and you have a list of words, let's say, that are like restricted or at least interesting words that you want to look for. And if you find those words used in communication, then someone should investigate the text, right? So the point being that you're actually analyzing text, or you're converting speech to text and then analyzing that textual information to look for abusive words or patterns in words that you want to flag up. Then there's the other side, right, where you don't actually look at that data. What you're looking at is the relationship between people and how they're behaving, who is communicating with who, and critically, when are they doing it. My personal view is that the latter, so how people communicate and when they communicate with one another, when you're trying to detect suspicious patterns and outliers, etc., is far more important than the textual information itself. Because it's not very often that you're going to get a trader who's going to chat to another trader and say, hey, let's try and ramp up the price of Vodafone so that we can then pump and dump the stock, right? So if only life was that easy. What I think is far more interesting is two traders chatting to one another and the price of something increasing, or they frequently talking to one another. So a group of traders or outside of an organization just before a rate fixing period or an auction period in a market chatting one another. That, in my opinion, is far more important than necessarily what they're saying. So when we analyze communications data from a couple of clients, what we were finding is that actually it's very difficult to find abuse and abuse in text. So hence we decided first we're going to develop the communications integration to put communication data at the fingertips of surveillance users and make it easy for them to filter and search and in effect query and view the data and view the relationships. What we have started to do, because I think we just need it in the product, is we started to look at how we analyze the textual data. So one of the things on our roadmap is actually to take textual information, run it through the AI engine, and what that's going to do is strip out meaningless words and then not, those kind of words, take them out and convert words to their root word. So abusiveness, abuse, they're in effect the same word. So if we had to take abusiveness and that gets converted to its root word, abuse, or abusive would also get converted to abuse. So we convert words to their root words, so then we analyze the root words. So that is, even though I'm saying when people speak to one another and how they communicate is the most important, I stand by it, I do also realize that we should be analyzing textual information. And that is something on our roadmap, and it is something that we started to look at, and that's what we're planning on doing, is converting text to root words, strip out meaningless words, and then run it against, do the normal patterns of word counts and looking for suspicious words. But I think this is a very interesting area, and we're looking at expanding, like I say, into rogue trading and trying to do peer analysis and understand what the differences are between a group of peers. So if there's a bunch of FX traders, we'd expect them to behave in a similar manner. If one starts behaving wildly different or different within, configurable range, it's that communications information that we want to put it. We want to alert surveillance users to and just say, hey, you know what, Patrick is doing some funny things. He's turning up early for work, he's changing some things, and he's communicating with people at times where no one else doing the same job is actually communicating. And, he's communicating with Sunita at these times and she works in mergers. It doesn't really matter what I'm saying. To me, that would be suspicious behavior. So again, a bit of a long-winded answer there, but I think in a nutshell, that really gives my own personal view. There are members of the team who do have slightly different views, and of course we combine them together and take the view of our clients. So whoever asked that question, it's a really good question. I would love it if you ping me and we can talk about it a little bit more together, because I wouldn't mind getting your viewpoints on which you think is more important and which parts of communication, surveillance and rogue trading you feel are appropriate to your organization.
Okay, and I see one last question. Do you have a view on AI and machine learning? Okay.
Yes, I certainly do. So there are, I think one, it's a very broad field, and we all go to the same seminars, and we hear the same information. So I think for me, there's three key areas around, let's just call it artificial intelligence, right? So there's the AI side, so the looking at, video streams and imagery, which we're currently not doing with EagleEye, but also looking at textual information, etc., which we are. So there's that side of it. Then there's the predictive analytics and machine learning. So your usual supervised or unsupervised learning, classification problems, etc. So I think it's really important, and I think it's as important as your usual programming logic, right? So, like off-market pricing, for instance, is normal programming logic. The off-market pricing alert that I showed earlier, which is, if a trade is done at an unfavorable rate for a client outside of, twice outside of the market spread, raise an alert. So what are we doing around machine learning and where are we using it? So one of the key areas is in false positive reduction. So that is a classic for us supervised learning algorithm case. And it's actually quite interesting because what we've done now with two clients, and I'm really hoping that we start looking at a third and a fourth and fifth data as well, so is looking at their data and looking at what have they done with alerts. So when an alert is generated, what happens to that alert? So what kind of scenario was it? What were the parameters? Who was the trader? What day was it generated, etc.? This is all data we already have. And what we started to do is look at, okay, well, what have the surveillance users done with that alert? Did they add it to a case? Was the case escalated? You know, was abuse confirmed? Did they add multiple comments? So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, an alert was generated. It had these parameters, so this scenario type, this instrument, this trader, whatever the case is. And then this is what happened to that alert. And then we decided we're just going to create a simple score. So if an alert is marked as a false positive, it's a 0. If it's added to a case, it's a 1. If that case has a lot of activity on it, or comments are added, it's a 2. If the case gets escalated to a higher surveillance user, if you like, it's a 3. So what we can then do is pass that on using a supervised learning algorithm. So it's actually ended up being a support vector machine, and that gives us a score of an alert that gives us an indication of, do we think something will happen with this alert, or how likely is it just to be a false positive? So that is a concrete example of something that we've looked at using the behavior of surveillance users when alerts are generated in order to predict the priority, if you like, of an alert. So that's one side. Then the other side of machine learning is, if I give an unsupervised example, was really all around the classification. So how do we find outliers? So what we're doing is pulling in data. It's very easy to understand in say a 2 or 3-dimensional way, but let me just try with the 2-dimensional, and then I'll make it difficult for brains to understand. But let's just say we wanted to look at traders' salary versus bonus, right? We can plot that, you know, X and Y axis. It's pretty straightforward. And then we say, hey, are there any outliers? So, you know, if we have data and suddenly there's a point where, you know what, a particular trader doesn't get paid a very high salary but has received a massive bonus and it's completely out of line with other traders within the group, we can alert to that. And we've used machine learning in order to do that, so just to find outliers. Now, the other thing with those kind of algorithms, the case I gave there was just a 2-dimensional axis, but it could be 3, 4, 5, 10 different dimensions. So what we were looking at is, okay, when we create this data, let's try and generate a new alert type, a new scenario type using machine learning in order to find outliers and give surveillance users the ability to say what dimensions they would like on the data. So that is actually at an earlier stage, so it's something that our team have currently been investigating, and we are working alongside the data science team to find more use cases of where we think machine learning or predictive analytics can be used, as well as parts of AI where we can try and understand communications data in a better manner and convert words to root words, etc. So that is really where we are investing in the solution at present, on the machine learning data science part of the solution. And again, a very good question. And yeah, whoever asked that, I'd be again very interested to get your views. So we actively try and speak to our existing customer base. Of course, we're running these kind of webinars to get people's opinions. I know not everything I say may be correct, or you know, people may have a different viewpoint. But again, whoever asked that question, I'd be really interested to speak to you to get your view, because this is an area where, as you could see from the roadmap, it's somewhere that we are investing quite rather heavily. And proactively looking into building more algorithms to help identify abuse, as well as make surveillance users' workflow more effective, so that they can analyze more alerts and do enriched analysis and reduce false positives.
All right, thanks, Patrick. These have been all questions that we received. So, and also we're now completing the full hour. So I think it's time to close the session. And yeah, I would like to take the chance to thank you again for attending our webinar today. And for more information, or if you have any questions later on, you can, of course, contact us, the team of this webinar, directly, or you can contact your local Software AG representative, or you can just visit softwareag.com. And as I mentioned before, we have recorded the session, and we will make the recording available within the next couple of days at our Software AG YouTube channel. So thank you again, and I wish you a nice rest of the day and say goodbye.